Hello everyone, Rob here. Welcome to another episode of Osborne Pro TV. Today we're going to be covering getting started with AppArmor. So those of you not familiar, AppArmor is a way of applying least privilege concepts to applications or programs and services and such. And it does that through the use of mandatory access control, or MAC. The benefit of MAC is that it applies extra permissions on top of Linux's typical DAC permissions. And for example, a DAC permission in this instance would be our read, write, execute, our chmod permission. So if we set chmod, everyone gets execute to something, those are our DAC permissions. We are able to limit that even more through mandatory or MAC permissions. And what that does, for example, is even though I'm the root user and I own this file, I can apply MAC permissions to this file that prevents it from accessing things that it's not allowed to access. So there's certain commands that are executed inside the file. If a command is executed that's not inside this file and there's a limitation on it through MAC, it won't be able to be executed even though I'm the root user and I'm telling it to. So that's the purpose of that kind of protection. The first thing we're going to start out here, I guess, is installing AppArmor is a good way to start. So to do that, we would simply apt install, and there's a couple packages I suggest doing. So there's, of course, AppArmor, which is our service. Then there's AppArmor profiles, and then there's AppArmor I always get confused with that spelling. Profiles extra, and what this does is install profiles in our etc apparmor.d directory. So that installs a lot of pre-built profiles so that we have protections going on that we don't need to set up. It's nice to have that kind of default protection going on. There's also, when we generate a profile, you'll see that there's a link that send us to a GitHub page allowing us to download other pre-built profiles for common applications. So apt install AppArmor are profiles. We also want AppArmor utils, which allow us to change profile values very easily. We are also going to want to install AppArmor notify, and this is going to allow us to set up a notification up here in the top right hand corner, which I'm going to point out in a little bit. And we also want to set up, what else is in my notes here? Oh, aasyprof. This one's not one I use too often, but it's good to have just in case. So we're going to use AppArmor aasyprof-y. And, and by proof, really, I should say profile, because that's what it's referring to. As you can see, I have all these installed already. The next thing I would suggest installing is Auditd. So if we do apt install Auditd -y. Now the purpose of Auditd is you can customize your logging a little bit more. The Linux kernel does not limit it, which is the main benefit of it. So there's two ways to approach this. Simply install the Auditd and let that service run, systemctl status Auditd. And what that will do now is log our log files to var log audit log, as opposed to var log syslog, which is the default. The syslog logging is limited by the kernel. So if you don't want to install Auditd, you want to keep using the default log file, that is fine. Maybe you are sending those logs somewhere or whatever. We can adjust the kernel rate limiting by doing the following. We use the sysctl utility. First thing you want to do is know what value we're changing. So we want to get the value by using tac-n. Then we're going to check the value of kernel.printk for print kernel rate limit. And what did I do wrong? Sysctl, maybe I got that wrong. Dash help. Sysctl-n, I must have spelled something wrong without knowing it. Kernel.printk rate limit. There we go. Okay. So the current value is 5. In order to turn that off, we want to set that value to 0. So I would do equals 0, and then if we go back, we want to write that value to 0. So now when I check it, we can see the value 0, and rate limiting is turned off for the kernel. And we're not going to miss generating or miss obtaining any logs that the AppArmor service really needs to help us create our profiles. Because if it's not loading the errors that it's getting, we're not going to be able to correct them. And the significance of this is going to be coming up when we create a profile. I'm going to show you that in a little bit, but this is very important. So since I don't need to worry about this because I'm using Auditd, I'm going to set my rate limit back to 5. And we're going to move on here. So AppArmor, it has 3 different modes. It has enforcing, which restricts access to files based on the profile built for an application. It has complain, which does logging, and it has unconfined, which doesn't do any logging, and it doesn't do any kind of restricting. Another thing to know with AppArmor here is, before we get into the profile, what was my notes here on that? Oh, so we'll do a couple basics. So we can check if AppArmor is enabled by doing AppArmor aa-enabled. We get a simple yes or no. An unprivileged user can do this, or we can get more detailed info as an admin by doing sudo aa-status. And that's going to tell us, hey, we got 33 profiles loaded, 32 are in force mode, and 1 profile is in complain mode. So I want this profile to be in force mode as well. So there's 2 ways I can do that. I can do aa-enforce and then etsy AppArmor-d lsb release, and now that's in enforce mode. So when I do aa status, I now have 33 profiles in enforce mode. I can turn it off, go back to complain mode in the same way, aa-complain etsy AppArmor.d lsb release, and now it's in complain mode. So I'm going to put it back to where it was before, where I want it in enforce mode. So that's the benefit of installing those AppArmor utils there. There is also, you can clear the contents of a profile using aa-cleanprof, so you can kind of start from scratch, or maybe you need to generate a profile again. This command will help you do that when you do, cleanprof etsy AppArmor .d and then whatever profile. So that will clear the contents basically and allow me to recreate it. I can also do where are you? So we have, teardown, that's it. So right now if I do aa-teardown and then I do aa-status, we can see I don't have any profiles loaded and there's no enforcing and no complaints going on. If you didn't mean to do that, you can simply apt reinstall AppArmor, and then when I run aa-status again, all those profiles are going to be loaded back up, so I didn't lose anything. aa-status, and as you can see, we're back to where we were before. Alrighty, so that covers basically those. Now what we're going to do is create our first profile. We're going to do this for a script I wrote called newusercheck.sh, and what this does is it's going to create a file that contains a history, or what's a better way to put this? It's going to send an email alert anytime a new user is created. It does this by monitoring the etsy passwd file, this file of course, and it keeps a hidden file called .user.lst, and this file basically is the etsy passwd file with just the list of users. And then it compares the new file to an old file, and any differences get updated. So you'll also notice here that once the file is created, it's not going to get created again. It can only be updated, but there is a chance in order to update this file, we're going to need read-write permissions. So you're going to see when we generate the profile later on here that it's not going to be 100% perfect. We have to go back and do a little editing to make it not as restrictive or as we need to be, or less restrictive than we need it to be. But basically, you'll see here we have bin cat, so we need to have, with Apparmor, we're going to give cat execute permissions so that the profile can execute the cat command. And we're also going to need to have read permissions on user list. And we're going to modify that later to have read write as well. Same thing with printf, we're going to need execute permissions on that. We're going to need execute permissions on cut. We're going to need execute permissions on diff and sed, and I think you get the idea there. So when we create a profile, there's two ways to do one. There's the systemic, which is basically setting a profile for something that runs across reboots, maybe a process that runs for days or months or whatever the case may be, an extended period of time. You would use aa-autodep. And that's what this is generating a profile for. It checks multiple system files and tries to guess the basic requirements for it across the system. But what we're going to be using here is aa-genprof, which is a standalone profile. And we're going to be using that. We have to define the absolute path when we do these things because that's how Apparmor works. So we use root scripts, and also before I do that, I'm going to show you aa-easyprof. When I do genprof, it's going to generate our profile inside etc apparmor.d inside here, and it's going to be called root ... scripts ... the name of the file, basically. But we don't want to create a file, say, we just want to start working on one. We would do aa-easyprofile. And we would do that for root scripts, new user, and all it does is generate output. So we can, of course, use our redirect arrows to send that to a file if we want and work on it from there, or we can simply highlight and copy and paste it, whatever you want to do. We're using genprof, and you'll see why here. So we're going to use root.scripts.newUserCheck. Another thing to take note of, this is put in complain mode. The reason for this is I now have to execute the script, and then once I execute it, I hit S for scan system log, and that's going to help us make the changes that we need to give it the correct permissions. Another thing to take note of here is the link for other profiles. So if maybe you need the netstat command is an example that they have there. These are pre-built Apparmor profiles that you know are going to work, so you don't have to go through and build one for everything on your operating system. So that's what that's all about. Next, what we're going to do is execute our script. So I'm going to go to my other terminal window here, and we're going to execute new user check. And you can see here's my app notify message. I forget if I covered this or not, but just in case, we're going to do app notify. You can see here what we're going to use is P for poll to pull the log file, and we're going to use wait 1. And that way we have, that's basically how I got that part going. So now over here, when I type S, it's going to come up with results from our scan system. And first thing to take note of here is we're making, of course, our profile for new user check. We're executing host name, and the severity is unknown. And that's mostly likely because the severity is not that big a deal with the hostname command. So we're going to choose I for inherit permissions. This is going to inherit the permissions of the parent process, which is bash. Child permissions and profile. So good way to explain this. So with our script over here, if I execute, if you're familiar with bash scripting, I can execute the hostname command right here. I can also use an ampersand to execute that in the background. And what that is would be comparable to child. And profile would be, say, comparable to just opening a whole nother terminal window, another bash window. So I would basically come down here, open a new window so that all the environment the variables and such get cleared in that case. So I hope that's a good description for those there, understandable one. There's also, if you select F for finish, that is going to complete your file. It's going to create it, and whatever you've done so far is going to be the contents of it. We don't want to do that yet because we're going to be restricting a lot of things if we do. We can abort, which allows us to basically start over. It's not going to save a copy of the file. We can deny, which we don't want to do because I need to execute this command for the script to work. So don't deny. And unconfined basically means there's no restrictions. X is on. IX is on is basically IX is parent process, is referring to the parent process. This is a newer one I've seen. I'm not entirely sure why I would set that over inherit. I guess I'm starting a new parent object by doing that would be my guess. Yeah. Unconfined means no restrictions, no logging. So we don't want to do that either. We're going to do inherit. Basically, 9 times out of 10, you're going to always be selecting inherit. So I'm doing inherit again for printf, inherit again for cat, inherit for cut, inherit for diff, inherit for grep, inherit for sed, and remove. And now we're on to DAC read search. Now DAC is, I believe I covered these permissions, is referring to these permissions here. Your read, write, execute, and root is the owner, and the root group also has permissions to this as well. So that's what we're talking about with DAC access controls. Another thing here, so we can allow it, we can deny it, ignore, audit. What the main thing here is we want to allow it. You're not going to be able to assign any extra permissions by allowing this. You can only take away. And since we need to possibly read files that the executing profile is not the owner of, we're going to allow. And okay, so we have our abstract consoles with read and write. We want to allow this permission as well. If you don't know what dev-tty is, it's permissions to execute the shell. We're in a TTY right now, or a terminal session. So we want to allow that. If you use glob, you can modify this so that it uses a wildcard at the end of the directory, allowing access to everything inside of there. You can glob with extension, which allows you to choose a certain file extension. So every .sh file extension in that folder is going to be, you're going to have access to, kind of thing. Or you can, of course, create a whole new profile for this one dev-tty, which would exist in etsy-apparmor.d, kind of that whole new profile. And of course we have some of our other things here. Again, abort and finish. Abort we don't want to do because it discards all our changes, and finish saves what we haven't completed yet. Excuse me. So I'm going to allow. Another thing I'll point out in case I missed it is read-write permissions are here. So we're allowing read-write permissions when we hit allow. Same thing here. Now we're only having the owner has read permissions to this .userlist file. That's what we need to change later, so we're going to allow it for now. Etsy passw file, we only need read permissions, so that's good. We're going to allow that. Same thing for user.list.new. We need read and write permissions, so it's got that for the owner. We're going to allow that. We need to allow read access to the file systems, or the proc file systems. And yeah, so that's our changes there. I feel like we missed DAC override, so we're going to check that next here. Notice here, until I hit finish, it won't save the profile. So now I'm going to go over to my one script, or it won't get us out of that loop, I guess I should say. It will save the profile. Now I'm going to run the profile as of right now, and we're going to check for any other issues. And so I've executed it. We go back, I scan again. There we go, DAC override. So we're going to allow this permissions. Again, it's not going to grant any extra permissions. This is the ability of the root user to read and access files that he's not the owner of. So we want to allow that. And then we're going to save our changes since we changed them, and we're going to run the script one more time just to make sure we didn't miss anything. Okay, life is good there. Back over here, scan, and excellent. Now we can hit F for finish. and it's generated our profile and placed it into etsy apparmor.d, and now this is where our profile is now under root scripts new user check sh, which is here. And I'm just closing out some of these notifications because I'd like to have one load here in a minute. Now to see what our contents are there, if we do root or cat etsy apparmor.d root new user check. So we have include tunables global. What this is referring to is if we check our AppArmor folder here again, there's a tunables directory, and it's referring to this global profile. So we can also read that profile if we want. And we can see these are the other includes here. So this is kind of this is the benefit of GenProfile here, is we get to load all this stuff that the back end needs in order to work. So back to catting this, same thing with abstractions. Abstractions bash is of course the profile for bash, and we are including all those in our restrictions here and such. We also included our capability for DAC override and DAC read search, and then we have our commands that we're executing. So because notice down here these are executables, so they have our top parent is the ix permission, which is, we can execute that. Then our other commands here inherit that ix, and they can be executed as well. So that's why we want cat grep all to be executed inside that profile. We have read permissions to our script, and we also move on to files down here when we have owner. So owner has read to the file systems, owner has read for user list, and owner has read for user.list.new. So next thing we need to do is modify that, because down here I just added a W. Oops. What am I doing here? Oh, so yeah, this line here, I keep doing this to myself, not even sure what I just pressed. W. So we have read-write permissions to user.list with our current user. And what that does now is when we run the script, new user check for the first time, user.list does not exist. So we need that ability to, one, initially create the file, and then if we update it later on with the new user, we need permissions to update that file. So that's why we are setting the read-write permission here. Once we set that permission, we need to update our kernel, the profile that's loaded into the kernel. So we would do that using AppArmor parser. What did I spell wrong? AppArmor parser, yeah. And tac lowercase r for reload. And then we want to load that profile, which is in etsy apparmor d root. Excellent. So now we've reloaded that profile. If we want, we can restart the AppArmor service to reload all those as well. AppArmor, sysctl restart AppArmor. Sorry, I got fog brain today. Okay, so sysctl status apparmor.service, and we can see it all ran just fine. Next thing we're going to do is run aa-logprof to make sure everything's okay, everything's good. Let's check our AA status, and we can see our new user check here is one of the profiles in enforce mode, which is what we want, so that's good. And yeah, so now when I run the profile, let's take a look here. root.scripts.newUserCheck and aa-log test log proof, we're good to go. The next thing we want to do is say I want to delete this profile, or say I want to start from scratch. I can do aa-cleanprof and then etsy apparmor.d and root, and it does not exist, so it must be root.scripts.newUserCheck. There we go. So I'm going to abort because I don't want to do this. Are you sure you want to abandon? Yes. So that's how you would do that. Now say I want to delete that profile so that it's not loaded anywhere anymore. First I would have to unload it from the kernel, which I can do by doing apparmor parser, uppercase R, then etc apparmor.d, and root. Now that is no longer loaded into the kernel. The next thing I need to do is delete that profile completely, which, you know, a typical remove command will take care of. And now there's also some extra files left over, which are, oh, they don't show them here anymore, so that's okay. The way that we get rid of those extra profiles is we do remove unknown. And yeah, then life is good. We'll restart our service again. Wow, systemctl restart apparmor. And everything's back to how it was before we started the video here. If you have any experience or anything you'd like to add, feel free to add them into the comments. I'd love to hear more. And subscribe. I'll try to come out with some more great content. Next week I'm going to be doing SE Linux is the plan right now. So thanks for watching.